Senator, again, the matter's under investigation, but what I can tell you broadly, and to restate some things I've said earlier, I am responsible for that. It happened in my area of responsibility, so I'm the responsible officer for that strike. Moreover, I was under no pressure, and no one in my chain of command below me was under any pressure to take that strike. We acted based on the intelligence read that we saw on the ground. We acted several times on intelligence that we saw, and we were successful in other occasions in preventing attacks. This time, tragically, we were wrong. And you're right to note that as we go forward and our ability to create what we call the ecosystem that allows you to see what's going on the ground and put all that together, it's going to get a lot harder to do that, particularly in places like Afghanistan. But I can share a little more with you later.
Well, thank you, General.
He had this video over, the last couple of weeks where, and as you were just saying, about the regulations of federal workers, it sounded to me that he was soliciting information or leaks or insubordination and to my ears, it sounded like insubordination from members of the military and undermining the chain of command. Now, as a retired Navy captain collecting a pension, he is still under the jurisdiction of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I asked the press secretary, Wilson, yesterday, will there be an investigation? We knew that there was. She confirmed that had been forwarded to Secretary Phelan over at the Navy. And by the way, I was also, we were going to have him on today, and we were also informed that he got pulled into the White House. Don't know if it's about that, but that's what he was supposed to be here today. And that the timeline on that investigation is 1 week from today, on December 10th. Walk us through what types of things we could see coming out of that investigation.
Sure. It's that investigation or review is being done by the Navy. I'm not a part of it.
Right.
But, they're going to look at a bunch of things. They're going to look at the facts of the case. This is not something where you really need an investigation because it all happened publicly. And so, they need to do a good review of the law and see the range of options they have here. Okay, it's not just about a court martial. They could bring administrative penalties here. They could, for example, reduce his pension. They could potentially, say he's being reduced to the rank of commander in his retirement, and then just take his pension down a bit. Ultimately, what they're going to do is they're going to make a decision not based on politics, but based on the facts and the law as to what statutes that video violates, what are the impediments to potential court martial, and what makes the most sense in this case. One of the difficulties of court-martialing a sitting senator, the Constitution prohibits somebody from serving offices in two branches at the same time. And so if a senator or congressman, there are members of Congress that continue in the reserves.
That's the legislative branch.
But if any of them get pulled to active duty, then they're an officer in the executive branch.
Right.
And so then they can't serve both offices at the same time, and it acts as a functional forced resignation from Congress or the Senate. Which that could potentially bring all sorts of other separation of powers issues. So, I think that ultimately the Navy is going to make a well-reasoned decision and recommendation. It could include administrative penalties as opposed to the full freight of a court martial. But then at the same time, you got to remember the FBI has been looking into this. So there's also the DOJ side, which applies to all six of them. And so, that's
and that would be as a civilian.
Correct. And that's obviously outside of this department's control.
Incredible. So this is something, and I appreciate, though, that the department is taking it absolutely seriously, because it certainly is something that undermines good order and conduct. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. And that's what the secretary has always said that he wants to restore. And we saw leaking even in the previous Trump administration from uniformed individuals that led to an impeachment process. We saw, honestly, leaking of classified information, which, did not result in any administrative corrections or punishments at all. And so I understand the necessity for keeping it serious. Moving aside there, and talking about other investigations, I did also receive information from Press Secretary Wilson yesterday regarding a phone call that was made between Secretary Hegseth and Senator Roger Wicker. And this is the head of the Senate Armed Services Committee. he had come out and talked about opening an investigation into the secretary regarding a series or a drone strike or series of
Yeah.
drone strikes, depending on, the parlance on that, that took place down in Venezuela.
Yes.
When it comes to the legality of these strikes, now this is something, and I've said here on the program, just with my background as an intelligence officer, what I know about that strike, just from open source reporting, seems to be standard operating procedure. It doesn't seem to be a differentiation for that. But for the audience, could you walk us through what you're looking at there?
Sure. So the initial strike, yeah, there's Office of Legal Counsel opinions that say we're allowed to do the initial strike. Where the controversy comes in is this follow-on second strike.
Mhm.
And here you really need to do a very fact-intensive analysis of it, because what the Washington Post did is, after the video came out and the lack of an unlawful order, they put out this fake narrative based on anonymous sourcing to try to pin an unlawful order on the secretary. But the reality is he did not give any such order. The commander, Admiral Bradley, he made the decision, a command decision, based on the information he had available to do a second strike. Now, ultimately, you have to decide, is that second strike a legitimate military target? And so here, I'm going to draw a very serious distinction between the people and the boat. Okay, because initially you have a boat speeding along full of cocaine and people, and that is a lawful target. You can blow it out of the water. You can kill everybody on board, no problem. After that initial strike, you do a battle damage assessment,
Right.
and you make
That's where us intel guys come in.
and you make a decision of what to do next. So if the boat is still floating and there's still cargo in it, it remains a lawful military target. The goal was to put it to the bottom of the ocean.
Right.
Because
they could be recovered.
Correct. It could be recovered, and there's a long history of this. We did this.
We've gone through that here on the program,
Okay.
explaining this is something the Navy has done for quite some time in the Caribbean.
Even before that, we did it in World War II. Battle of Midway. We got one of the Japanese carriers. It was totally out of the fight and full of wounded Japanese sailors, but because it could have been towed back, the USS Nautilus continued to put torpedoes into it until it went to the bottom of the ocean. The Japanese battleship Yamato, the largest battleship in history, same thing. It was stricken, it was listing, and we continued to put dive bombers and torpedo planes onto it until it went to the bottom of the ocean with all of the wounded Japanese sailors on board, because the goal was to sink the boat, not the people. Now, if you have a boat that's on fire, full of cocaine, it's got a couple of narco terrorists on board.
Who knows what kind of weapon?
That are wounded. That boat is still a target, and he can shoot that. Now, if the admiral sits there and says, I see two terrorists. I see two wounded terrorists floating in the middle of the ocean. I want to kill those terrorists. That's potentially legally problematic.
Okay.
But if he instead says, no, I see a boat full of cocaine that I was ordered to put to the bottom of the ocean, I'm going to put it to the bottom of the ocean. And one of his intel people, one of your types, grabs and says, oh, sir, there's two wounded terrorists on board. Well, that's collateral damage. That's fine. Even though the action is the same, you're still putting the exact same rocket into the exact same place. If your intent is to kill the people, that's potentially a crime. If your intent is to sink the boat, that's perfectly legal. And I think that's where people have really gotten confused over this thing. The law of war says that...
Which, by the way, is separate from an objective strike,
right,
which would be on, say, an HVT, high-value target, terrorist, where that is and has been signed off by OLC.
The thing about shipwrecked people, okay, in the laws of war, you're not allowed to target people that have been shipwrecked. And what that means is what the Japanese and Germans used to do to us, of strafing American sailors in the water, shooting sailors that are swimming. And that's a very different thing. If he was shooting at terrorists that were swimming or clinging to a piece of wood, like
Indianapolis.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Then that would have been a problem. But if he's shooting the boat, then that's not a problem. And that's where all the people are messing up their talking points and thinking that this is a war crime, when really this is perfectly permissible.